What's going on, CDL fans, and welcome back to Champ Sunday with Jake Maverick. Today, we're going to be overreacting to the week 1 matches from every single team. Obviously, we had weekend 1 of the CDL, so I figured what's more fun than overreacting to every single team and what they did this past weekend. We're also going to talk about the pacing in Black Ops 6 because Doug Lieb, shout out to him on Twitter, posted a pretty cool graphic that I want to talk about. And then we're going to round it out with the Ask Jake segment at the end of the video. Quick though, before we hop into it, I just want to say this is supposed to be going out on Sundays, but I'm going to keep it 100. I completely forgot to record this and post it last night. After LAT won, I was super hyped. I went to go eat dinner and I just totally forgot about posting this. So I apologize for it being a little bit late, but it will hopefully go out on Sundays going forward. But with that being said, let's hop into overreacting to every single team after week 1. Obviously, as I said, it was weekend 1 of Black Ops 6. It's finally here. And I gotta say, bro, the matches themselves were actually really fun. There was a lot of teams that surprised me and were better than I thought they were going to be. I feel like we're in for a pretty competitive season. But let's start off with overreacting to the Vegas Falcons. Falcons, of course, started out 0-2. They only won 1 map, which was a search and destroy versus the Carolina Royal Ravens. But honestly, for me, they were better than I thought they were going to be. Kicks, especially on the Falcons, looks like a really quality player. I think he's probably one of the front runners, if not the front runner for Rookie of the Year after the first week. Exnid and Roxas both also looked really good in big moments. They had some maps themselves where they looked really good. The whole team as a whole, honestly, is super mechanically gifted. You can tell the aim and things like that are there for these guys. The big thing really is I think King Abadi just needs to find his footing. He was kind of getting farmed a lot of the time, especially in the respawns. And the respawns are going to be where this team is going to have to improve. The SND, they're honestly pretty good. I think Search and Destroy is one of those game modes where you can kind of compete because like you could play a credit corner, you could just do a 4-man hit and you win your gunfights. SND, you could probably be competitive, so I'm not surprised Falcons are competitive in SND. It's really the respawns they're going to have to figure out and kind of just learn the fundamentals. I think having Clayster as a coach will help with this because obviously one of the best of all times, played at the highest level for over 10 years. He knows how to play respawn when it comes to in the CDL level. So once they figure that out and like how to rotate well, they were running a lot of ARs on some maps, which was interesting. They didn't run as many subs as maybe they should at certain times. Once they figure out those little things and with the help of Clay, I think Falcons are actually going to start putting some wins together. How many it's going to be, I'm not totally sure, honestly, but I think Falcons looked pretty quality for their first week of matches. Next up, let's talk about another team that started 0-2, and this is the LA Gorilla Mates. Honestly, for LAG, I'm not going to lie to you, bro. I picked them to go 2-0 this weekend. I bought into the Scrim Bucks. Everyone was saying LAG looked good in scrims. I think they were like rated 8th in the coaches poll. I really thought LAG was actually going to be better than they were. And I think the big thing for me is they got some serious slaying inconsistencies versus Rocker, their first series, which they did lose in a game 5, round 11. Lins and Skies were slamming. I mean, like I think they both had like 1.3s, even though they lost. And then versus Ravens, they all got killed pretty much, except for Kismet, who ended up going even and dropping like 90 something kills, I think, on the series. The slaying inconsistencies are super, super obvious with this team, which I think we kind of expected, right? I think everyone thought they were going to have slaying issues, but the way they came out in map number 1 with Kiz and Lynch just slamming, and then to go to the second one, or the second series versus the Ravens, where they kind of got slammed. I mean, Slasher and Gwyn, who we're going to talk about, were pissing on them. Was definitely interesting. I'm worried about their hardpoint, I can't lie. They lost by 75 or more points in 3 out of the 4 hardpoint maps they played. I think the other one they actually won, but to lose by over a whole hill, right? A hill is 60 seconds. To lose by more than an entire hill is not really great. You probably want them to play it a bit closer. So I think they're going to have to work on their HP specifically, but they definitely got to figure out their slaying issues. Now to talk about the Vancouver Surge, who went 1-1 on the weekend, 5-5 in map count. So dead even across the board, right? A pretty even weekend for them. Hixie, bro. Hixie is the guy on this team. I can't even lie. After the first weekend, his slaying was way, way, way more than expected. I think for most people, right, like we saw Hixie in MW2. He was really the objective player, the go in first and let CleanX or Scrap clean up after him. He was letting his teammates bait him. No one thought Hixie was going to come into the league this year and slay out like this. I mean, maybe there were some people out there, especially ones who maybe watched him last year in Challengers a lot, but for the general fan and viewer like myself who isn't as tapped into challengers, I did not expect this out of Hixie. So being 100% honest there, I really think Surge could be a sleeper team this year. They competed well with the Ultra, obviously lost in a Game 5 round 11. And then they obviously beat the Miami Heretics, who I think Miami's a team that's also, as we're going to talk about later, a team fighting for champs qualifications, going to be in that mix all year long. Surge definitely have to fix their control, though. I mean, they got 3-0'd by the Miami Heretics. They did beat Ultra in their control, so they're definitely have the capabilities and can prove that they've been able to win control. But you cannot lose 3-0 to Miami, especially being as Miami, like I just said, is a team I think they're going to be competing with all year long. Like, beating the teams around them, like Miami as one of them, is going to be super important. So I think they're going to have to work on their control. They were a weird control team last year, too. Obviously, Abuza and O4 still on the team this year. So something's going to have to go on with that mode. But overall, I actually think Surge is a pretty big sleeper team. And we're one round away from being 2-0 right now. So I think Surge is going to be good. Now let's talk about Cloud9. C9 is, I mean, they're the hardest team really to talk about, right? Like, how much can we really judge them? Obviously, they went 0-2. They went 1-6 in map count. But if you guys saw what was going on Twitter last night, if you watched the flank last night, obviously there has been a ton of server, internet ping issues for Cloud9. They are playing out of LA. I know they're Cloud9 New York, but Cloud9's an LA-based org, so the team is in LA. And there's this whole thing. They explained it on the flank last night. Accuracy was on. Obviously, the C9 coach basically said the Denver server, which they should typically be playing on, isn't really pinging well for them. For some reason, it's pinging much higher than it has in the past for LA teams. And then the Salt Lake City server was having issues with the Texas teams. So they've been playing on Chicago, and the Chicago server is like 40 ping per player more for the LA guys than it is for the Texas guys. So they're having some serious server issues over in LA. Hopefully the league fixes it. If not, it sounds like they might have to move to Texas, which is unfortunate for the Cloud9 org, but you got to do what you got to do if you want to be competitive. We're gonna have to give them another week, honestly, just to see how things change, if they look better. I guess the one big takeaway is they made a nice SND comeback versus the LA Thieves. They were down 5-2 on that Vault SND, and despite server issues and anything like that, they were able to come back, which is pretty typical out of them. So C9, a team that it's really hard to judge them after this first weekend. So I'm honestly, my overreaction to them is I don't really have a reaction. I guess it is an underreaction for C9 this weekend. Moving on, let's talk about probably the biggest shock, or one of the biggest shocks of the weekend, and that is Atlanta FaZe. I believe this is the first time FaZe have started 0-2 on a stage in the entire CDL. Not even on the season, like on the stage, right? This is stage 1 because it's the major 1 qualifiers. They are 0-2. They went 3-6 in map count, 2 of those coming against the LA Thieves. Everyone on the team is currently negative in terms of their overall KDs, other than Abizi. Obviously, KD isn't everything, but you typically see everyone on FaZe positive on the season, but it's a small sample size. It's still only 2 games into the year. They definitely have to find their footing in the slaying department. Versus a team like LAT, I mean, they might be the best slaying team in the game, so that one's tough. But versus Ultra, you kind of expect FaZe to slay out and win that series. So to lose that to Ultra, especially in a 3-1, Toronto, who we're going to talk about later, looking really good. The big thing for FaZe, honestly, I mean, this is the massive thing for FaZe. They're 0-3 in Search and Destroy. They have not won an SND map, and it's typically one of their best, if not their best mode every single year. They did release Tupac, who is their SND coach, or was their SND coach for the last, I don't even know how long, 3 years, 2 years, 3 years, something like that. So to see them release him and then their SND to go 0-3 makes you wonder how important maybe he was to their search. Obviously, though, on the bright side for FaZe, they showed some really good resilience and that comeback versus LAT. I mean, they were down 2-0, right? They got slammed 100-point clubbed in map 1. And then map 2, almost won it, but ended up losing it in round 11. The resilience to keep it going, win map 3, win map 4, and then almost win map 5. And it was 6-4 LAT. I mean, at the end of the day, FaZe is going to be scary all season long. So I think as long as they find that consistency in slaying, and they definitely work on their SND, they're going to be great. Now let's talk about the Miami Heretics, because Miami is a team 1-1 on the weekend, 5-3 in map count. So they did have a pretty good map count in terms of this weekend. The big thing, the overreaction, but I don't even know if this is an overreaction, is Real, bro. Real is him. 1.32 KD after the first week. He was literally slamming all weekend. I mean, Real looked like a top 5 player in the league after the first weekend, without a doubt. I mean, this guy was absolutely tucking all weekend long. I really think he could be the breakout star of this season, right? The most improved breakout star, whatever you want to title it. he looked so good. Rencor as well looked really good, right? Obviously, rookie player, his first couple matches in the CDL. He looked pretty good. I think he's a front runner for rookie of the year with kicks, like I said earlier. I think really the thing for Miami is Lucky and Metals just looked very underwhelming, honestly. Especially Lucky. They were making questionable plays versus Surge, especially in the game 5, where, I mean, if you watch the broadcast, you saw like the route they took in that last round was insane. I don't know what was going on with them in that game 5, but they definitely need to figure something out. And you also got to think for their AR players with Lucky and Metals, knowing that Super is eventually going to get his visa, and he's obviously their bench player for Miami Heretics right now, playing in Challengers. Knowing that he's there to take your spot once he's ready to come over to NA, you definitely are going to have to remember that because he's looking over your shoulder, ready to take your spot. So for the Miami ARs, they really got to step up and start playing better. But overall, man, I mean, Real and Rencor, they're the future of this team. Now let's talk about one of the 2-0 undefeated teams this weekend and so far this season, and that is the Minnesota Rokkr. These guys are icy, bro. Back-to-back Game 5 Round 11 victories for this team is just insane. I mean, when you there's two ways to look at it, right? There's the one way, it's like, oh my God, these guys are icy, which is how I'm looking at it, especially because this is supposed to be overreactions. Then the other way is they were 2 rounds away from being 0-2, right? So definitely shows you they got the ice, although they have a lot of things they need to work on. They're definitely a sleeper team this year. They might be the biggest sleeper team after week number 1. I mean, they are undefeated, right? They did go 6-4 in map count, because quite literally they won 2 game 5s. They did, I think, probably have potentially the best or like second best teamwork and pacing we saw this weekend. The fact that the entire team went negative, but they are undefeated right now, just shows how well they're playing together. They're challing together. They're getting trades. They're working to win rotations, to hold hills. The teamwork out of Rokkr, I mean, I think they all had 100 or 101 deaths in that first series that they played this weekend. So I think Rokkr are actually a team that is going to be interesting. And with how fast they play and the fact that they play fast together, I think that's a recipe for success. Zuma says it all the time. He says, the faster you can play COD, as long as you're playing it together, the better. So them picking up the pace, but doing it together is really, really cool to see. Also, Paul X, nasty at Search and Destroy. Gio said in his interview after that first matchup versus LAG, he said they were a team of 3. They knew they were going to be good in respawn, but they saw Paul and they picked him up specifically for Search. And I think he went like 14-3 or 14-5 or something in that game 5 ice in their second series. So Paul X is definitely him in Search. So it makes sense to bring him in. And I will say the teams they beat are the teams they're going to be competing against for a champ spot all year long. So getting these early 20 CDL points is going to be huge for Rokkr. So if you're a Rokkr fan out there, 1, let me know in the comments how you're feeling about your team. But 2, you got to be feeling good because that's 20 big points that, if you look at last year, it's going to matter a lot going into champs this season. Staying on the 2-0 teams, the undefeated teams, let's talk about the Toronto Ultra, the probably consensus 4th best team heading into the season. And now probably, you know, if you're looking at objectively this season, are, I would say, a top 3 team right now. And I think they absolutely proved they can hang with the on paper top 3 of Thieves, FaZe, and OpTic. Obviously, they did 3-1 Atlanta FaZe, which is a big victory to get under your belt. And like I said, for Rokkr, that's a big 10 points to add to your total for the season. I actually think massive potential overreaction, but honestly, it doesn't even feel like an overreaction with how good they look this weekend. I think they're going to make a grand final at some point this year, bro. I think at some point this season, they will find a way to make a grand final, whether that's some bracket luck where, let's say, they only have to play one top 3 team in like the winners finals to get there, or they make a nice losers run and they take down a top 3 team in losers finals, something like that. I think Ultra are going to make a grand final this season. CleanX looks insane, bro. One of the best players in the game right now, I'd say by far. He is looking so good. Beans as well, proving, I think, to a lot of the people who have been hating on him that he has the talent to fill that scrap role and to hang with some of the best slaying ARs in the game. And then Joe Deceives also, I think, proved just how valuable he can be. CleanX said it in his interview. He said Joe Deceives actually plays so fast it makes him slow down, which is insane because CleanX is historically, notably, one of the fastest players in the league. So for Joe Deceives to be that fast, that CleanX is like, whoa, I got to adjust and slow down. 1, shows that Joe Deceives has impact on the map, and 2, also shows just how good of a teammate and player CleanX is, right? To be able to say, I'm going to adjust my gameplay. I'm not going to try and force the new guy to adjust his. So I think Joe D proved his value. I think that sub duo looks disgusting. I said it before the season started. I think this is the best sub duo outside the top 3 teams, and I think they proved it, honestly, in the first weekend. All right, now let's talk about the fan favorite. Let's talk about OpTic Texas. I'm sure this is what many people listening to this are waiting to hear me talk about. Number one, Shotzzy is nearly unkillable on the map. I mean, he's number 1 in KD so far this season with a 1.43. Obviously, they're 1-1. I'm sure he would sacrifice his KD if they were 2-0 right now. We know Shotzzy's not a player that plays for his KD. He's never been that guy. He has looked insane when it comes to just getting kills, playing his life, finessing, and that's exactly what I think most people expected from Shotzzy in a game with Omni Movement in BO6. Obviously, they should have beaten Boston Breach. There's just no world that OpTic should be losing to Boston. I know it's the first weekend. I know it's online. Boston might catch him off guard. Boston had more practice. Whatever you want to say, they should beat Boston, right? All the top 3 teams should be beating a team like Boston Breach, in my opinion. But we will talk about Boston in a minute. They have looked good. Definitely a tough loss, and shows specifically that OpTic needs to work on their search and destroy. I mean, it's the same thing as last year, right? OpTic's SND was their weak point. So if they continue to work on their SND and get really good at it, especially Kenny, who has been bad at SND the last couple of years, which is kind of crazy because, I don't know, I always thought Kenny was just good at every single mode. So if they can get that locked in, I think OpTic is going to be good. The big thing I noticed, though, and this is something I talked about a lot on my watch party during the matches, it looks like Kenny and Dashy switched roles. Kenny was sitting in the hill a ton in respawn, and Dashy was running around getting kills. Looking strictly at their objective time per 10 minutes in hardpoint, Kenny had 92 OBJ per 10 minutes, and Dashy was at 49, which was actually tied, I believe, with Shotzzy in terms of, or it was either Shotzzy or Pred. He was tied with in terms of OBJ per 10 in hardpoint. So it's interesting to see. I wish, like, I don't know if anyone knows OpTic or works with OpTic that can want to let me know in the comments if this was a purposeful thing or it just was circumstantial where for some reason Kenny just happened to be in the hill and Dashy was not able to get to the hill, or it just wasn't a part of the bump in rotation for Dashy to end up in the hill in this first weekend, because obviously small sample size, only 2 matches so far. But I will say, if this is a purposeful move out of the team and out of the coaching to say, hey, Kenny, you start sitting in the hill, we want Dashy to start, getting active and going for more of the kills this season, I actually really like the adaptation from them. I think one of the things that, and we've pretty much seen it throughout COD history, right? Like, no team up until the LA Thieves in Vanguard and then into MW2 had 1 champs, stuck with the same roster, and won an event the next season. LAT were the first team to do it, like I just said. So OpTic obviously looking to be another team to do it, or to be the second team to do it, of course. I actually really like the adaptation. It's a new game, and sometimes adjusting and not just sticking to what worked the year before. MW3 is such a different game than Black Ops 6. Adjusting your roles and adjusting your playstyle for the new game in the new year, I think, is actually how you set yourself up for success. Now, obviously, maybe it's not going to work. Maybe they should go back to what was working last year. But if they are doing this purposefully, I like that they're trying something new and seeing how it works out depending on the game and the roles and the strengths of each player. Because obviously, we know Dashy can slay, so letting him get active on the map never seems like a bad idea. But now to talk about the team OpTic did lose to this past weekend, the Boston Breach. They might be the most surprising team this weekend. They're probably like second most surprising outside of like maybe FaZe going 0-2 or Rocker being 2-0. The Boston Breach, bro, I did not see this coming. I can't even lie to you. I did not see this coming. All of their players were getting kills and slaying, which is something I definitely didn't expect, being as Purge has been a guy who, I mean, we saw last year, right? How many times did he drop like a 0.6 or lower? Snoopy's a guy who we know has slaying capabilities, but is not usually consistent. Cammy has not been great recently. And then Awakening is a slayer, but last year obviously had a very down year. So how good they were getting kills was definitely interesting. Their big thing that I actually worry about, and people might be like, that sounds crazy because they beat OpTic in this game mode. I actually worry about their search and destroy. I know that they beat OpTic in 2 SNDs, obviously. What I worry about is their search and destroy versus the upper half search and destroy teams. I think it's obvious OpTic is not really like a top-end SND team. They weren't really last year. I don't think they are so far this season, obviously. So Breach's SND versus some of these top teams is what I worry about with them, because they did win both versus OpTic, but they lost both to the Minnesota Rocker, who obviously is the team who I said is pretty icy so far this season. So if they're not able to win SNDs versus some of the top search teams, they're going to struggle to win those series unless, of course, they can win all the respawns, which is also really tough against a lot of these teams. They really, though, the Breach, they might be the best red card team in the game. I think they're 3-0 on red card, and the 2 hard points they played on that, they won 250 to 185 and 250 to 186. So Breach, red card, if you're a team out there listening to this, you might want to veto that when you play the Boston Breach because it seems to be their bread and butter. But I do think, and this is like the big overreaction for Boston for me, if they get their SND right, like if they're able to compete with the likes of Rocker and Thieves and the other teams that are good at the Ravens who are good at search and destroy, I think they could be a T6 team this season. I think Boston can be a top 6 team this year if they get that SND to be a top 5, top 4 SND in the league. But speaking of another team that is pretty good at search and destroy, although they did lose an SND to the Vegas Falcons, the Carolina Royal Ravens, bro, they definitely were surprising. I mean, is Slasher back? Is Thanos here again? This guy, I think he dropped like 1.3 on the weekend. He was slamming in hardpoint. I mean, he was cooking in HP, which is, I mean, he hopped in the time machine and threw it back to freaking 7 years ago with how good he was shooting. And then Gwyn, obviously, I mean, this guy's a star, bro. He's a star, potentially ascending to superstar, depending on how this season goes. He too was slaying out just like Slasher, doing it in every single mode. He was insane. Tej and Vivid definitely had their struggles. Tej was good in SND, Vivid was good in control, but bro, a Vivid might have the worst start in SND I have ever seen in the 13 years I've been watching competitive Call of Duty. They've played 2 search and destroy maps so far this season, and he has a 0.15 KD in 2 maps of search and destroy. Guess how many, I mean, you might be able to do the math low key, or you might know. Guess how many kills he had in those 2 maps. I'll give you a second to think about it. He had 2 kills. He dropped 1 kill per map in search and destroy this weekend. Genuinely might be the worst start to SND I have ever seen. So I don't think that's going to stay all year, right? I think he's going to eventually get better at search and destroy. It might just be a weird weekend for him. I think once he gets that right, they could be pretty nice in all the game modes this year. But the one thing I will say about the Ravens, and maybe this is my overreaction for them, is I'm still not sold on this team, specifically because they played probably based on what we saw, the 2 worst teams in the league at this point, right? They played the Falcons and they played LAG, and no disrespect to the Gentlemates fans out there, and other than Cloud9, who obviously had server issues, the Gentlemates, I think, were next up as one of the worst teams. So they have not played the best competition yet for the Ravens. So I need to see them at least compete with better competition, because they didn't really play, just based off the first weekend, they did not play the best teams in the league or even upper half teams in the league and get wins. So they are 2-0. They are 6-2 in map count, right? They only lost 2, 1 to Ravens, 1 to LAG, or 1 to Ravens. They are the Ravens. 1 to Falcons. Sorry, I'm getting my bird team mixed up. 1 to Falcons, 1 to LAG. But I do think Ravens look interesting, and Slasher and Gwyn, bro, dynamic duo I didn't know was coming. And last but not least, save the best for last. Come on, you know how this is going to go. Let's talk about the LA Thieves. Big overreaction just to rip. Might be one of the best hardpoint teams of all time. They did lose 1 HP to FAZE, so all credit to them, especially Celium, bro. He went insane at the end of the map to close that out for him. But this team might be one of the best HP teams of all time, and I do think they are the best slaying team in the game right now, and I don't think it's close. The pace that the Thieves are playing at, and we're going to talk about pacing after this, the pace that this Thieves play at and the slaying that they have, I mean, all of them were getting kills. They were all slaying out. They were all making plays when it needed, popping a 2-piece when it was necessary. HyDra is nearly unkillable. Same thing I said for Shotzzy earlier. This guy is just insane, especially in hardpoint. He did start slow in SND and control, which was interesting. Luckily, the other guys kind of made up for it, but HyDra definitely started pretty slow. I think he got first blooded 6 times in that SND versus, was it versus Cloud9, I think, the game 2 SND that we choked the 5-2. I think he got first blooded 6 times in that map, so definitely got some things to work out there. Maybe he's got to play a little bit closer with Envoy and SND, but overall, HyDra, I mean, looking like an MVP candidate for sure. But the real MVP of this team is Dylan Envoy after the first weekend, bro. Envoy absolutely shocked the world and put the haters to bed this first weekend. A 1.16 KD, 95 Slayer rating. If you don't know what Slayer rating is, it's a stat on Breaking Point. Not 90 plus Slayer rating is, if it was last year, a 90 plus Slayer rating would be insane. So 95 to start the year is pretty nice. And then he's also playing a ton of OBJ, sitting in the hill, carrying bomb. Envoy is definitely the MVP of the team for me right now. And I actually think it's not really close. He did it in every single game mode. I think Envoy is that guy right now on the team, somehow, unexpectedly, with everyone else on that roster. But the big thing for the Thieves is they got to learn how to close maps, bro. They cannot be allowing the comebacks that they did, especially in Search and Destroy. Looking at what happened this past weekend, they blew a 5-2 lead versus Cloud9 and SND, which obviously they ended up losing that map. They almost lost a 5-2 versus FaZe, but they iced up in the round 11. It was 5-2, then it was 5-5, and they won the round 11, thank God. Especially because of that Draza team kill, bro. If Draza doesn't team kill Abe there, I low-key think FaZe might win that. They probably do win that map. And then they let FaZe tie up the game. It was 3-0 Thieves in game 5, and then FaZe got it back to 3-3, which was not good. And then obviously the big one, they nearly got reverse swept. They were up 2-0. They let FaZe get 2 maps, and they nearly lost to game 5, bro. So definitely got to figure out how to close maps, whether it's maybe the comms are too hectic when the other team starts to come back, or whatever the case may be. They got to figure out how to close their maps, because if this is what's going to happen all season long, bro, I don't think my heart can take it, dude. I think I might have a heart attack watching this team if they can't finish maps in a quicker, more clean fashion. But those are my overreactions for the teams. Let me know what you think about those down in the comments. But now I want to talk about the pacing this year, the pacing as a whole on Black Ops 6. Doug Lieb, if you guys don't know who he is, you should follow him on Twitter. He posted a graphic. This was after day 1, so I'm not sure how this updates after day 2. This is after day 1 of the matches, showing, I'll put it on screen, showing the maps in Hardpoint this year versus the maps last year based on engagement per 10 minutes. And the OpTic versus Boston map 1 is already faster in engagement than every single map in Modern Warfare 3 from last year, which just shows how fast Black Ops 6 is playing. Seeing just how fast it's playing comparative to MW3, obviously Modern Warfare 3. The thing with COD is every year the pacing's going to be different based on the movement, based on the map size, based on the movement speed, the tac sprints, all those sorts of things. But just seeing how fast this game is super, super interesting. And to explain this to you with literal stats from Breaking Point's website, obviously it's only a small sample size right now. We've only had 12 matches in Black Ops 6. Last season in Modern Warfare 3, there was only 3 players who averaged over 25 kills per 10 minutes in a hardpoint. So obviously to get a lot of kills per 10 minutes, you got to be playing fast. So only 3 players got over 25 kills per 10 minutes in HP. In Vanguard, which I think was probably the fastest CDL era game, right? The fastest game we've seen in recent years. Vanguard had 11 players over 25 kills per 10 minutes in Hardpoint. So clearly much faster than Modern Warfare 3 from 3 to 11, or I guess like from 11 to 3 because Vanguard came before MW3, but who really cares about that? But I want you to guess how many players after the first weekend of Black Ops 6 have over 25 kills per 10 minutes in Hardpoint. Like I said, in Vanguard, it was 11, which was a fast game. And last year in MW3, it was only 3 players. So take a guess, put it in your mind, drop it in the comments if you want right now, just so you can say if you got it right first. The answer is 21. There are 21 players, which, if you don't know, there's 48 players in a league. So it's just under half of the league is averaging over 25 kills per 10 minutes in Hardpoint. Black Ops 6 is playing at a blistering pace. The speed at which this game is playing is insane. And as a viewer, and I think most viewers would agree, Vanguard was one of the most entertaining CODs to watch in the CDL era because of how fast-paced it was. As a viewer, I love it, bro. I love watching how fast-paced it is. So, I mean, that just shows you a little bit as to how fast-paced this is. We'll see how it evolves as the year goes on, and then also as new maps get introduced into the map pool, because obviously there's going to be changes. We already know Hacienda is coming in for the first minor tournament in January, so we'll see what hardpoint map that replaces. People thought Red Card, but I've actually heard some people saying that they think it might be Rewind that gets replaced, and then we'll see if Hasi comes in for Control and things like that. But pacing this year is insane, which is pretty dope. But now let's get into the Ask Jake segment to round out the video. I only got one question today. There was only one question dropped on last week's video. So if you have questions or topics or things for me to talk about in the next episode, put it in the comments down below. You could just say like, here's a question for Ask Jake, or you could just drop the question down below and I'll note it down to talk about in the next video for next weekend's episode. But the question here is from my guy, Tommy. And he said, if OpTic have a bad year, he's talking about this season, if OpTic have a bad year and LAT have a great year, do you think if OpTic approached Scrap and HyDra that they would 100% leave even if they had a great year together? because like people say, you never say no to the OpTic offer. Obviously, word to Zinni on that one. My answer to this is no. If Scrap and HyDra have a great season, if they win 2 events in champs or 3 events, or if they win champs, these guys are not splitting apart. I just don't see a world in which they do this. Obviously, who wouldn't want to play for OpTic, bro? You go to OpTic, you quite literally just gave yourself a career long term, especially if you take advantage of the amount of content that you're going to be allowed to be in and start streaming even more. And obviously, HyDra and Scrap are guys that already have fans, let alone they're not on OpTic, and they probably have the most fans outside of non-OpTic players. I don't think they would do it, though, personally. I think from what you can tell from Scrap and HyDra, the most important thing for them is winning. Obviously, they could win on OpTic, right? Of course, they could win on OpTic. But if this team this year on LAT is slamming and they have a great year and they win 3 events and one of those is champs, I don't see why they would break up, right? You don't typically see teams break up after winning champs unless it's New York and after MW2 for whatever reason. So I personally don't think they would break up after a good year this season on LAT. If they won 1 event, maybe, right? And then it wasn't champs, maybe, right? But I think if they have a quality year, which includes winning champs, there's no shot they're going to break up. But that is going to do it for this episode of Champs Sunday with Jake Maverick. Let me know what you think down below. And make sure you're subbed to the channel for more CDL content, a ton to come. I'm excited to watch party next weekend and drop some more videos throughout the coming weeks for the CDL. So thank you guys again for the support. Remember to drop questions for Ask Jake down in the comments, and hopefully I'll see you all in the next one.